Welcome to the Wisdom Chat podcast. I'm your host, Phill Holdsworth, founder and director of AurumGold, guiding you through candid, easy listening conversations with industry insiders from a wide spectrum to talk all things money and well-being. Today, I'm joined by Deven Ghelani to talk about a number of areas around unclaimed benefits, social tariffs, and so on. So welcome, Deven, to the podcast.
Hi, Phil. Great to see you again.
Yeah, and you. Just for our listeners' sake, you're the founder and director of Policy and Practice, which is a social policy software and analytics company, working with councils, government, housing providers, and community organisations. That's quite a mix of organisations that you're working with there. But Deven, just tell us a little bit about your journey to where you're at today.
Yeah, well, I think you're right to point out we do work across quite a few areas for a relatively small organisation. I mean, we're a team of 35 in Westminster. And the reason I think we are able to kind of work cohesively across quite a different group of people is it's the problem that gets us going. So it's the problem of people not having to work to access the support that they need to be able to access.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got interested in this space. In all honesty, Phil, I've been pulling at a thread for about the last 16, 17 years. So when I was 26, 27, I was working for a startup company. And it didn't go very well. So I got let go. And I was living in London, and I had to claim benefits for the first time. It's quite a shock, as you can kind of imagine, when you sort of walk in, you go into the job centre, they send you back to call the service centre, you answer some questions on the phone, who then send you back to the job centre to fill in some forms. No one tells you about housing benefit. So I was kind of living in London for 8 weeks, and no one told me that I could have been receiving housing benefit while I was renting there at the time. I got a job pulling pints behind a bar in West London, and told the job centre, and I was working, I think, 10 hours a week for £6 an hour or so. And then the reward for that was effectively all of that money going toward paying off my benefits, because on the legacy benefit system on job seekers allowance, it was a pound for pound reduction. So I was thinking, okay, well, that's so far so complicated and unhelpful. But if that was my first job, if I was trying to take my first steps into work, I wouldn't find that particularly rewarding. And I've just been pulling at that thread ever since. So I've been arguing for a simpler social security system where it's easier to access. I mean, it's costly. It's frustration for me personally, but also kind of on if you're a taxpayer, it's an incredibly inefficient way of running an organization. Like you just need to make it easier for people, and it'll become, you won't need the people on the front line can spend less time administering benefits and checking up on you, and much more time supporting you. So that's been the driver behind Policy and Practice.
Yeah, I must admit, when I was first told, it was in a meeting at Caxton House, DWP's headquarters, that Universal Credit was introduced to us as a group in terms of what they planned to do and how it would work. The thing that really struck me was the taper system, whereby as your income began to go up, the benefits would then go down. So it would ensure that somebody was not left without any money. That was the theory behind it all. But I must admit, observing that sort of transition from the old legacy systems to universal credit, it's not quite what I thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason I call Policy and Practice is to see what happens to a good policy idea when you try and implement it and put it into practice. And it's very clear to everyone, I'm sure, listening, that universal credit has had plenty of bumps in the road in getting it to where it is today, and it's got further to go still, I would say. And I think there are two reasons for that. I think one is, it's obviously a massive change to the social security system and a lot of work to get it in. And I think it started to prove itself as being a better system on which to build than the legacy system that it's replaced. You can kind of see that through the pandemic. It was able to deal with the scale of claims that came in. you can see how it was flexible in the context of the £20 uplift when the legacy system wasn't. So I think it's starting to show itself as being a better system on which to build. But I think the other big driver of the problems that it's faced has been implementing it in a time of extreme austerity.
Yeah.
So a lot of the challenges and that universal credit's faced wouldn't be challenges if the social security system was a stronger safety net. The challenges people face when dealing with deductions on universal credit are lessened if the amount of support you're getting is greater.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of these two things, and I do like it's a major change, and it's being implemented in a time of austerity. And I think particularly the austerity piece often gets mixed in with universal credit and its aims at the same time.
Yeah. Just thinking in terms of what you've just said about your sort of journey to this point and setting up policy and practice and I suppose its purpose really. I'm just thinking about the repercussions for many people has been sort of, for some, the feeling of exclusion. And you and I met when we were helping to set up the Financial Inclusion Commission. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that and the purpose behind it, and how your organisation and Financial Inclusion Commission can work sort of very closely together?
I mean, yeah, that was a good while ago now, Phil. What, almost 10 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, it will be, yes.
And just to introduce the Financial Inclusion Commission, it was I guess it was a gathering of the great and the good who wanted to do something, get financial inclusion on the agenda beyond social security. So making sure people had access to the financial services they need, and kind of taking a broader look at things, with some successes, which I'll come on to in a second. But I guess the reason we got involved, I'm far from describing myself as the great and the good. It was my after kind of being on social security, I'd been interested in that and kind of working on it in the background for a while, and it led to a role in policy. So I worked on some of the ideas behind universal credit for a number of years, and it got reasonably well recognized as a policy expert in that space.
Yeah.
And when I started policy and practice, again, when you're starting a company in the early days, I mean, I built this benefit calculator, the universal credit calculator as it was then known, but I didn't have, I had one client for it, I think, at the time the Financial Inclusion Commission started. It was very early days. So really, one of the ways in which I grew the business as it is now, policy and practice as it is now, was by doing policy work, so consulting work for the Post Office, for Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and for the Financial Inclusion Commission, where policy and practice was the secretariat for 4 years. What that meant was I was able to grow the team at policy and practice, hire some incredible analysts to work alongside me, whose role it was to I'd sort of be there and support them. But actually, there was a lot of kind of the secretariat work of the Financial Inclusion Commission is to go around and do all the research and do all the work that you need to be able to do, so those on the commission can make better informed decisions and influence those that they're close to in the right way. And one of the things the Financial Inclusion Commission did, I'm never sure whether this is a good recommendation or a bad recommendation, but we got it through anyway, and I think it has proved itself to be a good one because it keeps it on the agenda, is that DWP now has a responsibility for financial inclusion. There's a minister who's responsible for financial inclusion, and that was Guy Opperman until very recently. So it has had its successes.
Yeah, definitely.
But as the business grew, as policy and practice grew, started working with more and more local authorities, housing associations, and others, it created the space for us to be able to step back from that and focus on what policy and practice does today, which is more the software and analytics side of using data to help people identify the support they're missing out on. And I guess the biggest change since I started to today, Phil, I started with a phone and a laptop, so it was kind of getting to where we are today felt like quite a long way off then. I think one of the biggest shifts I've said is, when we started out, we were taking a horse to water, so helping people identify the support they're eligible for. What we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years is making that horse drink. So kind of putting in the integrations with working with partner organizations, local authorities, companies, to actually just streamline access to that support directly. So kind of going from, you could now go off and go to your water company to apply for that social tariff, to just click here and agree to pass your data across, and the discount will be applied to your bill. So kind of going from a very complex process, which used to take, the individual would have to wait 2 months, the company would spend a lot of manpower administering that, to it being a few minutes in most cases. So I mean, that's been that most recent shift has been a huge change and a big motivator for me, because it's a bigger challenge, right?
I'm just thinking about the two aspects. So there's the like software development, and the so you mentioned right at the beginning the universal calculator. But now you call it better off calculator now. So that's on your website. So why did you create something like that? What was it that drove you to create something like that? I'm fairly certain I know the answer to it, but
yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because actually there are two big drivers. So the first one is I'd explain I worked on universal credit when I was at the Centre for Social Justice. I'd have to explain it to people. And so many people, particularly those less interested in social security, I mean, even chief executives of local authorities, not many people are that interested in social security. You learn when you're very into it and you talk about it all the time. Not that many people reciprocate. And I remember presenting to a room full of local authority chief executives and showing them the calculator. But I mean, it was really that the fact that they didn't understand. So the calculator was a better way to convey how the social security system operates than just explaining it to people. You'd see eyes roll. It's going to be a simpler system. Great, we've heard that before. Actually showing them how it has the potential to be a simpler system, how the taper works, how it could make you better off in work. Just open people's eyes. And I think the second big driver was, the benefit calculators that were available at the time. You basically had to be an expert in social security to be able to use them. And I wanted to build something that was much more straightforward and easy to access. And actually the simplicity of the universal credit calculator, as it was then known, was what drove its success. It was initially 8, 10, 12 questions, which has grown into, and this is a really interesting point to touch on, incredibly accurate and comprehensive. And one of the biggest challenges as we've grown is to kind of maintain that simplicity and ease of use that I think people want, while also delivering the accuracy and comprehensiveness you need, because you're dealing with people's finances, social security, incredibly complex areas that can have a huge impact on people's lives. So you need to be correct to the penny. And that's been a really, it's a perennial challenge, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you touched on it earlier in your own experience with regards to the complexity of claiming benefits. You're not being told about the benefits that you would be entitled to. And I must say, my experience of benefits, not just of universal credit, but many, many years ago, just the whole experience was quite difficult and challenging. And I think the approach then, it kind of left you feeling like you were a lesser person than everybody else. And so remaining in that situation and wanting to ask questions. Well, first of all, you needed to know what questions to ask anyway. Most people don't. And then also it's just how you're dealing with the emotional part of that situation that you're in. So you kind of don't want to be there. And so you want to get out as soon as possible. So really you're needing something that's easy to access, easy to understand, but actually opens up that area of being able to access the support that you really need at that moment in time. And I know, just touching on the fact that it's been publicized so many times, you've raised it in your own sort of research, and this whole area of the 19 billion unclaimed benefits. And you're thinking, how ridiculous is that in this present age? But many of it may come to the fact that people don't know what they don't know. And also the system not being so easy necessarily. I know things have changed a lot, but in terms of those experiences, would you say we have actually come a long way, that we have sort of turned a corner, or is there much further to go yet? And what could that look like?
Well, no, I think there's clearly much further to go. I mean, that number's gone up. So the 19 billion pound
Yeah,
figure comes from a report we wrote, what, 3-4 months ago.
yeah,
And if listeners want to find it, just Google 19 billion pounds unclaimed benefits, and the report should pop up
yeah,
via policy and practice. But it's definitely worth taking a read through, because again, there's a lot in it. The 19 billion pounds worth of content in there. I think one of the reasons it's gotten worse, so while universal credit's been introduced to try and simplify and streamline access to support, at the same time you've got austerity, you've got a cost of living crisis, you've got the pandemic that led to more people potentially becoming eligible but not knowing about it. You've got things like cost of living payments, you've got an increase in energy bills, you've got an increase in water bills coming down the track, which means you've got energy companies and water companies setting up their own schemes, which makes it something else that people need to be aware of. And
yeah,
that was partly why what made us write the report. I mean, again, we cover all of these topics, areas, we check eligibility for all of these things in our in the Better Off calculator.
mm,
But I think that's reliant upon people knowing about it and knowing that they need to claim, knowing that they need to do something. So there's definitely a wider awareness raising piece that needs to happen. I
yeah,
think one of the things we've done, I guess there are 2 points to make here. I think one of the things we've done is try and reach out more into sectors outside of the kind of the core advice sector. So local authorities, housing associations, citizens advice, other frontline organizations is where we grew. But we've been doing a lot more work, as I mentioned, with energy companies, water companies, banks, because sometimes people go to them first. And
yeah,
really that awareness of, you could be better off. You don't need to take out a loan with us necessarily. You could, you're eligible for the social tariff if you're struggling to pay your water bill. It,
mm,
you're not just helping them with their water bill. You're helping them with, when you help them access the wider range of social security benefits, you're helping them to pay their energy bill. You're helping them to pay their council tax bill. And if the local authority is doing that too, then that the local authority is helping to make sure they don't get into water debt. But the
mm,
other big driver of the problem, the other reason we do the policy work alongside the practice, is because you can't, the social security system is there kind of it's a safety net, but
yeah,
the scale of the drop that people are facing is getting bigger. So if you've got a cost of living crisis, if you've got, you need to make the case for social security. You need
yeah,
to say there's this unclaimed support, but even the unclaimed support is trying to bridge, social security is worth 7.5% less in real terms than it was a decade ago.
yeah,
And that's with kind of inflation matching increases in April. So that would have made it much worse. I think because benefits are less generous than they were, we're
yeah.
doing what we can by helping people access the support that's unclaimed. But actually, you still need to make the case for social security in its broader sense, as you and I did together when we were working on the Financial Inclusion Commission.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the extension of the work that you're doing in terms of reaching. You talked about banks and so on. Knowing the fact that, I mean, at the end of the day, a bank's a business. It's in business to make money. Would it see itself as engaging on that social aspect, in informing people, helping people understand what they're entitled to if they're struggling in any way? Would you see the banks engaging with that, or do you see there's some way to go yet?
You mentioned earlier where the software is called the Better
Yeah,
Off now, or the Better Off calculator. One of the reasons for that is because as we moved into these new sectors, they really didn't want to talk about social security. They didn't want
yeah,
to talk about means tested benefits. They didn't want to suggest to people, oh, you might be eligible for this, because they felt it might be, there was a stigma attached to social security, and that came through in the conversations we were having with that sector. But when you tell people you can make them better off, when you can tell them you can get them a discount on their water bill, that's money saving expert stuff. That's straightforward. Everyone wants to be a part of that. So part of it is a branding how you talk about things. And then I think the second point, as we've worked in these new sectors, is there is a CSR element to it, and that's good. There's a kind of corporate social responsibility piece. Let's link to this better off calculator on the website or whatever. But I think that the shift in conversations we've been having, and it's been a real step change for policy and practice, and I think the sector, is to go from a transactional relationship, here's a link to a benefit calculator, to a transformational relationship where you're delivering improved business outcomes for the businesses that you're working with. So I gave the example of the one-click application for social tariffs in the water sector that we've implemented for a number of water companies. That's brought the cost of administering those benefits down considerably while increasing collection rates, because you're not helping them just access the social tariff, you're helping them access other bills too, which means if they're on a repayment plan, they're much more likely to stick to it, or can increase what they can bring down their arrears. We're doing a huge amount of work on the data side, so kind of using with the local authority benefits data, proactively identifying people missing out on pension credit or free school meals, which means that you're reaching those that perhaps aren't already aware. And I think one of the challenges that the companies face, because they haven't dealt with social security too much before, is just raising awareness. How do you identify those that are likely to be eligible? Because you don't want to be messaging people that aren't. You're wasting their time, and you're also, kind of creating a bad customer experience. So kind of improving that customer experience too. When you're delivering these core business outcomes, you have a much better conversation. And as I mentioned, kind of the branding stigma piece is also something that
I think just on your point about the CSR side, and also in terms of reputation, people will go where they feel valued and where they get the help and the support they need. And oftentimes they will look at, say, for example, a bank as being almost like a service provider for them, not necessarily as a business as such. So I think from the bank point of view, to be able to engage in that way and be seen to be much more helpful and supportive, actually it's going to be a good thing for them in terms of retaining their customer base, but also for the individuals. They're going to feel like, it's like going back to the days when you used to go walk in and talk to your bank manager, have a meeting with your bank manager and do a review of whatever it was. Actually, people will start to think, well, that's a place I can go, because I know they'll always help me and point me in the right direction. And I think it just reminds me of, at the end of the day, what we wanted to do is to help individuals be able to access what they need to access to be, I suppose, a contributory member of society. And I think of my own sort of family experience, watching certain family members who have gone through and are going through, like, for example, universal credit, and how at times it's almost acted as a barrier really for them progressing, as opposed to what it's intended to, and that is to support an individual on a journey to not becoming reliant on the benefits, because that's what we want at the end of the day. We want people to build that resilience and become self-sustaining, but all the way along, not having the right information, and also some of the restrictions in terms of working or training, improving their skill base and things like this, can actually, and even things like childcare, can actually have a barrier effect to them moving forward. That's things I've been observing. I mean, what have you seen in that sort of way that perhaps we need to address, or is being addressed?
No, I think a lot of it, does exist. And I was fortunate enough, Lee Healy of Income Max invited me along to an event he held in Parliament earlier this week, about really to talk about the £19 billion of support that goes unclaimed. And one of the things, credit where it's due, this is something he said at the event, which I think is worthwhile sharing, is he just kind of reminded everyone that this isn't about money. A lot of our work, better off calculator data, this is £19 billion, it's all kind of financial sums, right? So we're guilty of it sometimes, of just kind of focusing on the economic case. But actually, the social impact, when you start talking about the impact and the change you can have in people's lives, that gets everyone on side. I think there can be some sort of reluctance. We talked about stigma earlier. There's some reluctance to say, why should they get my money? Or, there can just be a real negative stigma around benefits. But when you say, actually, no, we've helped them to, when you talk about the impact that you're having on people's lives, they can go to work now, they can progress, they can earn more. That's good for society. It's good for everyone. Or even for those in the most dire circumstances, we've done some of the proactive outreach work we've done with local authorities. They've had a call to say, actually, we think you might be eligible for a household support fund payment. And they've said, you don't know how much I needed that call. You don't know how much that's made a difference to my life right now. And it's this kind of talking about it in the context of people's lives. I mean, I know this is kind of a money podcast, but it is. But the reason money is important is because it affects people's lives. So talking about the impact that you can have on people's lives and well-being gets social security, I think, in a better place. And I think some of the barriers to the type of support and interactions people have with social security is two things. One is the administration is so complex that you have to spend too much time on it. It takes up a lot of time, energy, effort, and it's painful for the consumer. As I said, it's painful for the taxpayer as well, because it just increases the cost of administration. And I think bringing that down is probably where we are. But once you've brought that down, you then create space for, I think, more positive experiences on the front line. There's a little bit more time for the advisor, the work coach, to talk to you about the where you might be able to go for wraparound childcare for this particular job, how there might be support for training, maybe not for that particular course, but here's some other support that you might be able to access. If you can create space for those kinds of positive and constructive conversations, I think there's a slight cultural challenge there of making those conversations more positive, fundamentally. But I think what some of the work we do on streamlining access to social security does is it creates that space for those broader positive conversations about improving lives, and that's what we're here to do.
And I think at the end of the day, when people experience that and see that they've received that sort of help and support, and they're being encouraged, I suppose, to be a better version of themselves, there is a real well-being impact on that individual, but also in terms of the organisations that have helped and support. There's a real sort of positive impact on how they're perceived. And I agree with you with regards to culturally, we need to be more focused on what positive outcomes we could achieve by certain changes being brought to bear, whether that's informing people more, supporting them in terms of improving their work opportunities. And I know at the moment we're in kind of an unusual situation in so much as that their sort of unemployment levels are quite low compared to the number of jobs available. And there's an issue with regards to being able to fulfill some of those posts that are available, the skill levels. And then, like for me, my family member wants to improve their skill levels so that they can actually fulfill that, fill some of those slots and better themselves, but also contribute back. And I think it's looking at ways of reducing the barriers that potentially could hold that person back from achieving it. I touched on this sort of childcare because that, for this family member, is an issue. But also at the same time, some of the rules sometimes, or the application of the rules around training, amount of training they can do, what type of training they can do, and so on, can be a little bit prohibitive.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about now some of the administrative barriers, right? So we're not talking about, is there training available? It's how do I get the support I need or the space I need from the say the job center to go and pursue that training opportunity instead of look for work. Or in the context of childcare, actually, you can get 85% of your childcare support costs covered through universal credit, but you have to find the other 15%. And for people on very low incomes, then you need to find that there's childcare available. So, just to kind of, I think I've made this point, but I guess whenever we talk about the 19 billion pounds of benefits unclaimed, I say it's a great practical opportunity to help people who you can
Yeah.
help, but it doesn't solve the problem in itself, because Social Security is less generous than it used to be. All of the wider barriers that you've talked about need to also be resolved around making it easier to access childcare, that childcare being available, the training opportunities. I mean, I think some of the reasons that the 19 billion pounds does make a difference is because when you can help, and we're doing this work actually with local authorities, so we're linking the data on boosting people's income, so the work we're doing on take up, to things like adult social care costs or children's social care costs. So if you help someone, a pensioner, access pension credit, does that mean they stay healthier for longer? Probably. And we're doing the work linking the data to kind of care costs to evidentially prove that. Similarly, on one of the highest return on investment interventions you can make, whether you're private or a kind of social investor, really makes no difference, is if you can get a child who is going to school hungry, preschool meals, they're going to learn better. There was actually a kind of a study that got shared with me at an event from Swansea University a little while ago, which showed that it doesn't just improve educational outcomes, it improves health outcomes. It means they go to A&E less. And this is all proven stuff. This is all, it's obvious. So I guess the point here is, yes, we talk a lot about money and the fiscal impact that you're having on people's budgets, but actually the real value here and the case for Social Security is the wider social benefits you can have on just people having better lives, whether they're young, old, or in between.
Well, we know a simple fact with regards to stress and anxiety. If you can reduce that stress and anxiety, people are able to function a lot better, contribute a lot more, problem solve a lot easier. And so,
and you know all this from your work at CAP, right? So you've been dealing with this you've seen this on the front line for years.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really struck me in that work with CAP was the fact that how long people would wait to ask for help. So on the one hand, there's not all the information's been given to individuals to help them along a journey when they hit that sort of difficult period or whatever however it comes about. But equally at the same time, it's remembering, and it really is taking a point that you're making. We're human beings, aren't we? We're emotional, we're psychological, we're not just, it's not just the monetary side. There's a whole other raft of things going on in our lives. And how do we support people in those areas so that they're not adversely affected and therefore less able to contribute? We're actually creating a positive environment where we're looking after their well-being. We're informing them around the things they need to be aware of so that they can then become a contributory or again, a contributory member of society. So it's not losing sight of the human element when somebody finds themselves in a difficult place. So if you think back to the day when you had to then first go and claim benefits and what that felt like for you at that time, I remember what it felt like for me. And how that area seemed to be missed, when we're dealing with the practicalities.
How you're treated as a person, I mean, like I say, I've been doing this with policy and practice, has been around for just over for 10 years now. We had a birthday party earlier this year, and when I lose my, you're growing a company, lots of things get thrown at you, opportunities you can. When I have to kind of remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing, or kind of making decisions on, I go back to that moment of what it felt like for me and saying, is this project going to help me to solve that problem? And like I say, that's why we're able to offer, I guess, the breadth of services we offer, because they're all coherent because they fit around the same problem. And I think that's been really kind of powerful. And with all the work you did at CAP, I think one point you made, when Christians Against Poverty was first founded, you established the external affairs arm, this kind of argument to kind of make it larger on a influence broader policy, but it used to be just very much on the front line. I think one point I'd make is you see how long people wait to get that support, and that's partly why you're facing those problems on the front line. I think, for those that are listening to the podcast, it'd be really interesting, particularly if you're kind of arguably at a slightly earlier stage of seeing people in financial difficulty when they first fall into arrears with you, whether you're a water energy company, whether you're a financial services, give us a call and have that conversation, because if you can just even point people to the right support, let them know there's support there. If they come to get help 3 months earlier than they otherwise would have, the opportunities to help them are
Yeah.
so much greater. And let's kind of focus on prevention rather than cure.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I encourage the people I work with, is that if they find themselves in a difficult situation, the natural thing is, I want to try and work this out myself. And or there's the feeling of sort of guilt, shame, the very things that hold them back from saying, look, I could do with some help and support here. But I would say to them, actually, so much change has happened now out there in the wider world. It's better to have the conversation, and you'd be amazed on first of all, how you're treated, and secondly, what kind of help and support that you can get as a result of putting your hand up and saying, I could do with some help here. So it's always, yeah.
Just touching on those feelings of guilt and shame, I think, and stigma in general.
Yeah.
One of the things I found we do that I think makes a real difference. Two things that I found that we do that makes a real difference. One is kind of the tech. So focusing a little bit on the tech. So giving people this route where they're not having to reveal themselves to a person in the first instance. Actually, it's, I need some help. Could I get a discount on my bill? And being pointed in that direction through, we're on gov.uk, where we've got 200 plus organizations that use the Better Off calculator, which kind of creates this kind of opportunity for people to be directed toward it.
Yeah.
And I think that creates this opportunity for people to start to help themselves and open themselves up to support. Okay, now I know I'm eligible. I might need some help completing this form. I'll start that conversation with a third party. I think the second big thing we've done on I guess stigma and shame is use data to proactively identify people who are missing out. So actually starting off that conversation. I gave you that example of a local authority calling someone up saying, we think you're eligible for a discretionary housing payment. Thanks. I had no idea what I was going to do this month. We've started this positive conversation. And actually one of the, one of the things that we've just worked with the Greater London Authority to send out over 12,000 letters to households eligible for pension credit across London. And so far we've had 1,700 households take it up. We think that'll continue to go up as because it's only been a few months since the campaign was launched. And one of the things the local authorities have told us is it isn't just they can, if they need help to complete the form, they can contact Age UK. There's a number on each letter to their local organisation. So it isn't just the financial side. They're now able to contact a frontline organisation. It's helping to tackle, helping to kind of, I guess, raise awareness where there are issues of social isolation. And I think what's really exciting is, we're optimistic we'll get to do that again. But for those households that haven't responded, there's an opportunity to put a little bit more effort into engaging those households again, because they're the ones that arguably need that help the most.
Yeah. No, what you're doing and the whole area of raising awareness, I think, is excellent. And the more the merrier in many respects, because I live in what would be classed as quite an affluent area. But what people don't realise is what's going on behind the scenes. In actual fact, there's even in the place I live, which is Harrogate, North Yorkshire. It's viewed as being, the place where people
part of the world.
Yeah, and it's a tourist centre as well. However, it has its own challenges, and sometimes perhaps perceived as sort of a darker side that people are unaware of. And I think when it's not an awareness for here to say don't come because it's not what you think, but it's a awareness of the fact that wherever you go, there are people who need help and support, and just genuine help and support, and to raise awareness of where that help and support is, and for them as individuals to be reassured that it's okay to say when you're struggling, and it's okay to ask for help. And there are organisations there who won't just help in one area, but can help you in many different areas. And the perception they then have is a lot more positive, a lot more willingness to be open and talk about money. We're terrible in our society in terms of, we'll talk about money generally, but we don't necessarily talk about me and how I deal with it and how I feel about it, and what do I need if I need help or some guidance or whatever it may be. We just have a very
I think we do need to talk about it more. I mean, I do think it's, I mean, that was true in the Financial Inclusion Commission work we did, right? So a lot of it was about how do we make financial education, or even just the stigma of talking about money, less. I mean, it's quite funny, I'm Gujarati, and we don't have much qualms, to be honest. And I think some of it is just cultural. And I think it would be a good, it's sort of a, it's part of that kind of reticent English culture sometimes, I see it as, when actually I think you can, something that you can and should be a bit more open about. And I think we'd become a little bit more aware of the challenges our society is facing in a broader sense if we just talked about them a little bit more. I mean, if you think about the cost of living crisis, it's absolutely not affecting everyone equally. There's a lot of people who are absolutely fine. If you've paid off your mortgage, you're not going to be affected by increasing interest rates. There's very little and actually, I think sometimes the money in society flows in the wrong direction, and society flows up, and then society could, so the social security mitigates against that to a small degree, and I think it needs to mitigate against it quite a bit more, which is why I think raising awareness of, even if you're kind of, whether on a very low income and need that money right now, or if you're on a middle income and just struggling, you should know about it and you should be able to access it. And that's why I think some of the work we do is so important. And I'd encourage everyone to raise awareness of that, because that is just how social security it's there for you. And that's my experience of, I felt when I was first made unemployed, I thought, well, here's a system that's here for me, let's see how it works. And I found broadly that it didn't work nearly as well as it ought to.
Yeah, certainly. Deven, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I would say very positive. Certainly, we're looking to address some of the barriers, like, for example, just simply talking about money. And we need people like yourself to help us culturally go beyond this. This is a private matter. We don't talk about these things, when in actual fact, we should do. And the more it comes into the light, I think that the better the help and support and how people will feel will be. So thank you very much for that. And, more power to your elbow, I would say, in terms of the work that Policy Practice does.
It's great to catch up again, Phill, after all these years. And I do think I think there is room for positivity, although it's quite a bleak environment right now. I think if we do nothing else, I do think we're on the cusp of making access to social security, making it easier to access social security, a real issue that gets acted upon. And if we leave behind the kind of infrastructure that makes that easier to do, you then create space in the social security system to actually kind of deal with the fundamental challenges that people are sometimes facing in their life. And as we said, I think it's not really about the money, it's about people's lives. And that's why this work's important. So it's a privilege to chat to you again, and really broad conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And like I say, I mean, it's lovely to see you again. And I do have fond memories of those early days, although my involvement was short compared to yourself. And I'm glad that the Financial Inclusion Commission is still going strong, I believe, and doing some excellent work. So it's very much appreciated, and appreciate what Policy and Practice do. I think this raising awareness is really important. Any of the listeners who are listening to this podcast, if they're wanting to sort of, look at some of the work that you're doing, or even look at the benefits calculator in a sense, where would they go? How could they get that sort of information?
Great. So I think I guess the first thing to do, particularly if you're an organization, is Google the 19 billion pounds of benefits unclaimed and look out for the policy and practice link. I think that's a great introduction to the topic of just how much support there is out there. Policyandpractice.co.uk is the website if you want to find out more about the work that we do. But also we're on gov.uk, or you can just go to betteroffcalculator.co.uk if you want to use the benefit calculator. Equally, I'm on LinkedIn. Deven Ghelani is quite easy, Deven Ghelani. Have a go at that yourself. And you'll drop me a DM or connect. I'd love to kind of carry on the conversation. I imagine you'll be putting this out, Phill, on LinkedIn and stuff. So I'll comment so people can find me there.
Yeah, try and put the podcast. It's on all the podcast platforms, but it'll also go across certain parts of social media as well. So yeah, and thank you very much, Deven, for your time. Really appreciate that. As I say, nice to catch up with you again, and definitely want to continue the conversation going forward.
If I'm up in Harrogate, we'll have to go to Betty's.
Definitely. It's well worth a visit. As long as you're prepared to queue.
Yeah.
And we're very good at queuing in this country as well.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for your time, and all the very best.
Thanks a lot, Phill. Speak again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.